Hi, and welcome to Occupy Ukiah TV for November 15th, 2012. And we're back on the air. We've got we're going to do a little bit shorter show, and we're going to try to do some shorter shows in the future so that you'll not get tired and change the channel. Anyway, welcome. Good to see that you're watching, and we're in the studio tonight with Alex Bergdahl, our engineer, and he's going to be with us for a few more shows before he goes back to Wisconsin. And we're having a lot of fun. We've got a new studio, new set. Check it out. You have to come down to Channel 3 and check out our new digs. We've got quite a nice a set going on. It looks like I'm going to have to change my clothes now. I'm going to have to put on a suit or something. Anyway, we're going to be talking about, we're going to do a little review on the election. We'll be talking about Prop 37, the death penalty, and cannabis. And we also have two videos. We'll be looking at the depleted uranium weapons issue. And we're going to be, in the future, doing a show with Jamie Connerton, who's a member of Veterans for Peace, and we'll be doing a show on the depleted uranium weapons issue. He couldn't be with us tonight, so we will be probably shooting a series of shows on that. It's big. It's part of the nuclear industry chain. It connects the whole thing with the reactors, the military, big business, government, the whole thing. It's an integral part of the entire nuclear web. So we want to put a little magnifying glass on that and have a close look. We'll show a couple videos tonight, and I did show a couple videos a few shows back on depleted uranium weapons, and we're not giving up on the nuclear issue because, as I said before, I really think it's the most serious thing going on the planet today environmentally, and it's threatening our genetic future. So that's what we're talking about. Let's move right into the show. We'll talk about our update right now. We found a winner for the Farmers Market Bucks. We were at the General Assembly a couple weeks ago, and a woman named Julie came up, and I'm sorry I don't remember her last name, and I'll try to get it if I see her again. And she said, "Hi, I'm here for the Farmers Market Bucks." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's the password?" And she said, "Localize." And so I handed over $20 of free Farmers Market bucks to her with the little Chico bag. And so she went right over and bought a whole bunch of stuff at the farmer's market with a big smile on her face. And she actually spent some time talking with us at our GA. And she had a lot of great views. So maybe we'll put up another prize like that in the future, and we can get a little quicker response. Who knows? You could be the winner. We want to remind everybody that our General Assemblies are at Alex Thomas Park on Saturdays, 10 o'clock, Alex Thomas Plaza, and you'll see our Occupy canopy. Sometimes there's other events going on, and so we don't put our canopy up, but oftentimes we're lurking around the fringes. We like to talk with people. It's a public forum, so if you see the canopy, come on up. And maybe during the cold weather we'll have like a pot of hot tea or something that we can share with you. But come on up and listen in on our conversation, join in on the conversation, take part in our process because it is your Occupy group. Also our direct action meeting, we meet Sundays at 11 o'clock at the MEC, the Mendocino Environmental Center. They're on Stanley Street. That's where KMEC Radio is. And Sundays at 11, you're also welcome to come in. Usually we have a little 8 to a dozen people. We're running usually a consensus meeting with a facilitator. And you're welcome to come in and join that. It's a little bit tighter format, and it's nuts and bolts planning about what we're going to be doing. Also remember that we have a radio show Wednesdays on KMEC Radio 105.1, Wednesdays at 5, from 5 to 6 Peter Good and Bart Kaplan are your hosts, and they often have guests on there. I was on there. They've had several other people from the Occupy Ukiah group on there. And also then Bart Kaplan does an organic gardening show. I believe it's organic gardening. It's about organic food. He does it right after that. So it's actually a 2-hour block of really good information. So tune in on Wednesdays at 5 o'clock for the Occupy the Airwaves radio show. And then, of course, if you're watching this on Channel 3, you see us on Sundays, 9 a.m. In the morning, and also on Sundays at 8 p.m. In the evening. And you can also tune in on archived Occupy Ukiah TV shows on YouTube. Just search for Occupy Ukiah TV. All of our archive shows are on there. And then go to our website, occupyukiah.info, and all of our shows are archived on there. Plus, we're getting our momentum going again on our website. And we'll be having information about upcoming activities and whatnot. So it's a good thing to check out. Okay. We're going to do a little review on the election. You know, a lot of people felt like there were some big issues up that Occupy Ukiah was actually supporting, and several of our members were working with one of the parties here in town. But a couple of them that I want to talk about that I was really surprised about, and that was Prop 37, the labeling on GMOs. I was really surprised that didn't pass in California. And I think that they must have hit the media a lot harder outside of Mendocino County. I did see commercials. If you watch football games or any of the real mainstream TV, I saw more commercials against Prop 37 to not have labeling. But in general, I didn't see a lot of advertising. But from what I've heard, the LA area, and the heavy metropolitan areas were just inundated with big bucks advertising against Prop 37. So all this tells us is that we've got to roll up our sleeves, because everybody needs to know what's in their food. It's a basic human right. And we've got such a high-tech world now where you can't just go out and pick everything from the field or the garden or the forest. You're buying it in the store, you don't know who grew it, you don't know who packaged it, you don't know what's in it. So it's a basic human right now to know what's in our food, how it was grown, and what has been added to it. So, you know, the basic bottom line is, if they were proud of GMOs, they would be proud to have it on the label. Obviously, they're hiding something. They don't want you to know it's in your food. They just want you to eat it. So we've got work to do. This is not going to go away. We definitely have to demand from the people who package our food and sell it to us in the store that we want to know what's in it. And if it's genetically modified, we want to know. And then you have the freedom to buy it and eat it if you want. But frankly, I don't support those farmers, and I don't support Monsanto and Dow and Cargill and all the people that are pushing the whole GMO thing on the planet. We'll get into some other shows on that. We'll be doing some all about GMO like we did earlier with the Vandana Shiva videos. And the other one that I was surprised about that did not pass in California was the death penalty. There have been some states in the U.S. that have banned the death penalty. They've done away with it. And I really thought, well, California's there. We're a very progressive state. We're going to pass this. It's going to go over in a landslide. And it did not pass. And I was really surprised, because not only did they offer us the chance to ban the death penalty, but they also gave us a chance to save money. And that seemed like it would appeal to people. But it's interesting, because I don't hear people talk about a certain aspect of the death penalty that I think should be you know, I hate to be so opinionated, but I think it should be the only way we should look at it. Whether or not you're in favor of taking an eye for an eye. It's a moral question. Is it right to kill somebody who kills somebody else? We can argue that till the end of time. Some people think that it's right, that if somebody kills, murders somebody, then it's right to put them to death. You don't even need to argue that part of it. But what we do need to look at is that our judicial system is like any other judicial system. It's imperfect. It's made up of humans. Humans are prone to error. People can't quite remember what they saw. People aren't sure about when it was. It was dark. It was funny lighting. They don't quite remember if the guy was wearing a ball cap or what. So there's a mistaken element that comes into our law system. Then there's the people who will outright lie and frame people to, obviously to avoid being prosecuted, or to frame somebody else to put them in jail or to put them to death. And so, I mean, look at modern sports. The referee makes a call, he throws a flag, or he calls a touchdown. They show a video replay and they say, oh, his foot was on the line, and they overturn the call. That's because people are imperfect. Judges make mistakes. Whole juries make mistakes. So the question is, since it's an imperfect system, there's a certain percentage of innocent people who get put on death row. There's a certain percentage of innocent people who get put to death. How many innocent people are we willing to execute in order to have the death penalty? Would you volunteer? Would you volunteer one of your children or your family members or your friends? Who, if you were sitting in jail right now on death row and you're going to be executed in a month, how would you feel all of a sudden about the death penalty? And you're innocent. So I really think that the only way to do it is that we should have no possibility of parole, life sentence. You put them in jail, but that at least gives a person a chance to clear themselves. If they've been framed, if there were mistakes made, oftentimes, as you've seen on all the cop shows and the documentaries and whatnot, people get on the trail of somebody's story and they find out that they were framed or that there were mistakes made, and they get out of jail. At least they weren't put to death. So we have to revisit this question too, because it's really time for us to quit claiming that we're perfect and our system is perfect. No system can be perfect, which goes right along with nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is fine as long as you don't make any mistakes, and as long as there's no earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that. So we can't demand perfection out of our world. And so I would like to also, we'll do some death penalty shows in the future, and I think it's going to become an Occupy issue. I'm going to propose that to the group, that we do a public forum and day about the death penalty, and talk about how many people have been executed who are possibly innocent, and how many people have been let out of jail after they found out they were innocent. Okay, and then cannabis. I thought it was very interesting that 2 states passed cannabis, Colorado and Washington, which they're both rather militaristic states. They both have a pretty strong conservative streak through them, but they're a little bit like California in that they're kind of bipolar. They have a really progressive, strong progressive element in both of those states, and they passed the legalization of recreational cannabis, and I'm all in favor of that. And I saw that we had it here on the ballot, what was it, a couple of years ago or a year ago here in California, and it went down to defeat. And when I heard that Washington and Colorado had it up for vote, I thought it was going to go down to defeat too, and only for the reason that, as much as I'm in favor of legalizing it, I think it's the only sane thing to do. I think once again, because we have such a high-tech society that demands precision from people, such as scientists and pilots and nuclear plant operators and people in the military, you know, who have their fingers on the buttons of many missiles and things like that. If you legalize cannabis, then you're going to have some sort of a field sobriety test. How stoned can you be? Because we already have a limit to how much alcohol you can have in your system, right? You can drink alcohol as long as you don't drive and fly a plane and go to work with more than so much in your blood. Fine, so it works fairly well. If you get busted, you go to jail or pay a fine or lose your license or whatever. It works. There's people I know that when they get high, they should not be behind the wheel. They should not be doing certain tasks. There's other people I know personally who I think can carry on just fine having any amount of cannabis in their system, but it's not the same for everybody. It's definitely not the case for me. It's not what I would choose, is to do some high-tech, highly demanding job under, say, the influence of THC. So until we can develop some sort of accurate field sobriety test, I don't see how it can actually work. Frankly, even though like I said, I'm all in favor of legalizing it, because I think that the whole prohibition madness is really destructive to our society. It's destructive to our psyche. It's just a lie all the way down the line. So I'm surprised, and I think that both of those states are going to come head to head with some really sticky issues, because yeah, they can take a blood sample from you, or they can take a urine sample from you and find out how much THC you have in your system. So if you smoked a half an ounce this morning and then got behind the wheel, it's different than if you smoked a joint last week and got behind the wheel. You still have it in your system, but the amount that's in your system can't be quantified unless you do a blood or urine test. And I don't think any cop is going to pull you over and demand that you piss in a bottle for him. I don't think it's going to come to that. So, you know, we don't want the guy, when you get on the airplane and you're going to fly across the country, we don't want your pilot, you know, saying, welcome to our flight today. You know, we're going to be flying at really high. We'll get there, yeah, whenever. You know, you would probably rather not have your pilot high when he's flying. So there has to be some way of quantifying it. Anyway, that's about all I have to say on this. It's going to be interesting to watch. I'm thrilled that they passed it. I think that it could be a bit premature. I'd like to see the technology catch up with the laws. Anyway, we're going to move on, and we're going to be dealing with the depleted uranium weapons issue tonight, and we'll be doing some future shows on that. I've got a couple videos, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we're going to sign off. So our first video tonight is called When the Dust Settles, and it's a nice animated feature that gives a great, very simple introduction and explanation of the whole depleted uranium setup. So here we go.
Depleted uranium is a byproduct of the process used to enrich uranium to make nuclear weapons or fuel for power stations. Because of its high density and because it burns on impact, it's used in armor-piercing tank shells and bullets. The uranium is used in a dart at the core of the weapon. This is called the penetrator. Unlike nuclear weapons, uranium weapons do not cause damage by using radioactive fission. Instead, they rely on their high density and strength to pierce armor. Depleted uranium ammunition is fired by tanks, aircraft, and armored personnel carriers. When a depleted uranium penetrator hits a hard target, it burns, producing a radioactive and chemically toxic dust. Contamination can remain for years, and the decontamination measures suggested by international agencies to protect civilians are technically challenging and require money and expertise. Money and expertise are often lacking in countries recovering from conflict, and hazard awareness, monitoring and decontamination programs will compete with other priorities. The dust poses a threat to civilians, military personnel, and peacekeepers. Contaminated vehicles often remain in populated areas or are removed to scrapyards where they're broken up and sold. Environmental contamination lasts for years after the conflict. Uranium from weapons can also find its way into drinking water wells. Abandoned vehicles are exciting places for children to play in. Young children, like pregnant women, are generally more susceptible to damage from uranium exposure. Inside the body, some of the dust will be soluble and can pass into the bloodstream. Other particles will not be soluble. If inhaled, these may lodge in the lungs for a long time, emitting radiation directly into the tissue. Other particles may be transported to the lymph nodes. Soluble uranium entering the bloodstream will be excreted in urine quite quickly. But before this happens, it can travel to many parts of the body. Uranium accumulates in the bones and other organs. Uranium in the bones could irradiate the bone marrow, potentially causing leukemia. Uranium has been shown to cross the placenta and the blood-brain barrier. Because of their rapidly dividing cells and developing organs, unborn children may be more at risk than adults. At a cellular level, uranium has been shown to be genotoxic, meaning it can damage genetic material, causing mutations and increasing the risk of tumors developing. In Iraq and the former Yugoslavia, where the weapons were used, it's been suggested that increasing rates of cancers and birth defects may be linked to the use of uranium weapons. Unfortunately, there have not been any large-scale studies on civilians which could settle the issue. Other pieces of the jigsaw show that there are serious reasons for concern. Veterans from conflicts where uranium weapons were used are ill. Although other factors are likely to have played a role too, many were in situations that could have exposed them to uranium dust. Laboratory studies show that depleted uranium's chemical toxicity and radioactivity can cause disruption at the cellular level, with the potential to cause health problems. Workers and people living near a factory that made penetrators tested positive for depleted uraniums years after exposure, showing that uranium dust can be a long-lasting contaminant. Concerns about uranium weapons have been raised in the United Nations General Assembly and the European and Latin American parliaments. However, some international agencies, such as the World Health Organization, have declined to take a precautionary approach to the issue. This contrasts with the military in many countries, with soldiers now urged to take precautions and use protection in contaminated areas. Manufacturers and stockpilers of uranium weapons include the United States, the UK, France, Russia, China, and Pakistan. They argue that uranium weapons are so effective that they must be retained. However, humanitarian concerns must always come before military needs, both morally and under international humanitarian law. Uranium weapons are not currently banned by existing arms control laws. A specific treaty, similar to those for cluster munitions and landmines, may be required to explicitly ban them once and for all. A uranium weapons treaty could set a precedent for international law, covering all toxic remnants of war, reaffirming that where there is a potential risk to civilians and the environment, a precautionary approach should prevail. When there is uncertainty, the burden of proof should be on the military to prove that there is no risk, rather than civil society having to prove that a weapon is harmful. It cannot be right that armies can deploy a weapon because they believe it is useful, while leaving civilians who have no choice in the matter at risk long after the fighting is over.
Okay, so yeah, that's a really nice, simple format. It's easy to watch, and they do cover a lot of things. One of the things that I would add to that is that when they said in Iraq and the former Yugoslavia where these weapons were used, and then they went on and talked about, you know, what happened. It ain't just Iraq and Yugoslavia. It's anywhere where we have fought a war since the late 80s. So the Gulf War, Afghanistan, any place where we've used any armor-piercing rounds since the late 80s, and even Israel has been purported to have used them again, I think in Beirut in the 70s. So it's a way of life for our military. And they say, like it said in the video, that it's the only most efficient, most wonderful weapon in the world. You know, it just pierces through anything. But the problem is that it leaves behind this highly radioactive dust that goes everywhere. It goes into the soil, gets into the water. And in one of the previous videos that we saw, one of the previous shows, I showed a video where they hit a building with armor-piercing weapons, and then demolished the building, and then they bulldozed it in the river, and everybody in the town and the area was drinking and bathing and washing from the river. And so there was a super high incidence of leukemias and cancers as a result. And so what we've done is not only have we declared war on a certain people, people have done that ever since people began. Declare war on somebody, you kill each other, you have a big hoo-ha. Finally, people get tired of it, and they make some sort of a treaty, and it's over. But in this case, when you have radioactive weapons like this, it's not over. It doesn't end. Depleted uranium is hot and dangerous for as long as the planet and the solar system have been here, 4.5 billion years. Depleted uranium, or uranium, is the only radioactive substance that was in existence on the planet until we created nuclear reactors and the whole reaction. Then we created the plutonium and the cesiums and all the wonderful things that we've talked about in the past that can do horrible damage to life on Earth. But uranium is in veins throughout the Earth, and I think that primitive cultures knew enough to stay away from those places. And of course, what do we know? We dig it right up and spread it all over. So let's move on. The next video is poison dust, and I won't say anything more about it. It will explain itself. Let me pull it up here. Okay, I'm going to have to refresh here, and then we'll go with it. Here we go. Oh no, excuse me. That's why I couldn't find it. This is the one we were looking for. Alrighty, this is called poison dust.
Radiation has a long history. was discovered in 1895 by Rankin. By 1912, the first book was published on radiation-related cancers, and it took until 1929 for the radiologists to finally form a committee, and they did it to protect their own health. Herman Muller got a Nobel Prize in 1944 for showing the dramatic genetic effects of radiation on offspring. So it wasn't an unknown substance. Muller wrote an article in 1950 that talked about weakening the species. You're putting more radiation waste in the environment, which is hard to cope with, and you're producing people who are less able to cope with it. And, you can't keep doing this. Anybody with common sense knows that, you're working at both ends to really destroy the species. Depleted uranium is a waste product from the nuclear industry. In the 70s, there was talk about mixing it with ordinary metal and putting it into bicycles and refrigerators and stoves and automobiles. We raised quite a fuss at the time and opposed using it for any civilian purposes. But what happened very quietly is behind the scene, the government gave it free of charge to the weapons manufacturers. It served the purpose of getting rid of the radioactive waste, and it provided free metal for the weapons manufacturing.
They have a weapon that is unbelievable. If you are only interested in fighting wars, you have a trump card weapon. Nothing can withstand depleted uranium. There is no tank, there is no armor that can withstand a depleted uranium shell. One of the things we were always told around the military environment is the military takes care of its own. And I think we're learning that their idea of taking care of their people is very different than our idea of taking care of their people. But it's used because it's a very effective armor penetrator. It's incredibly dense. It's more dense than lead. It slices through tank armor like a knife through warm butter. It's used in many weapons systems, including the M1 Abrams tanks, the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle, Tomahawk cruise missiles, the A-10 Thunderbolt, known as the Warthog, and the Navy's Phalanx anti-missile system, which is on board every ship in the U.S. Navy.
Now, what are the dangers faced by our troops and also civilians in that area? This dust gets everywhere. It spreads into people's homes, it gets in your lungs where it stays for a long period of time, and people who have gone into these areas with large quantities of uranium dioxide show that the radiation count is about 1,000 times higher than what it is in terms of the natural background. Now, let me explain. Just by living on the planet Earth, you get about 100 millirems per year of radiation. That's a very important number, 100 millirems per year of radiation. However, once you are at these sites where you have depleted uranium being emitted, you can easily get up to 200 millirems per hour. So in other words, upwards of 1,000 or more times background radiation. In other words, it's like getting a chest x-ray every few minutes. So once you begin to inhale this material into your lungs, small particles of uranium dioxide will begin to radiate the nearby cells. And all that radiation is then concentrated into a very small area. So you have potential radioactive hotspots in your lungs as a consequence of this. So precisely because alpha radiation is not very penetrating, all of its energy is deposited in the nearby area of the areas that are affected. And the Pentagon itself now mentions the fact that there's a possible kidney, lung, and liver damage. uranium comes in two basic forms, U-235 and U-238. U-238 is the most plentiful found in uranium ore. However, billions of dollars have been spent by the superpowers trying to extract U-235. U-235 is very rare, and it is the stuff of atomic bombs. Once you mine, mill, and enrich uranium, you have the byproduct of this whole process. Now, this material is very cheap. In fact, the United States sometimes even gives it away for the military to be used for specific purposes. If you've ever handled DU, you know that waste uranium, if I were to hold it in my hand, just a small sphere of it, you go like this. It's unusually heavy, deceptively heavy. A small piece, smaller than a softball, weighs 1.7 times that of lead. It is one of the heaviest of all known metals because of the fact it has 238 protons and neutrons in the nucleus. As a consequence, the military likes to use it in shells, in shell casings. Now, when it hits armor steel, it actually will penetrate the armor steel and vaporize in the process. And that's where the danger is. Depleted uranium is not unradioactive. It's still radioactive, it still emits alpha radiation, and that's one of the main concerns. Approximately 375 tons of depleted uranium were fired in the form of shells during Gulf War I. And during the recent Gulf War, we're talking about perhaps 1,000, maybe 2,000 tons of this material was dispersed in the form of uranium dioxide. Now, the Pentagon, by the way, has its own rebuttal. The Pentagon, first of all, points out that we are talking about low levels of radiation, which is true. However, I should point out that this material has a half-life. The half-life of U-238 is more than 4 billion years. That's approximately the lifetime of the solar system, the sun, the earth, or about 4.5 billion years old. Uranium is basically an alpha emitter. There are three kinds of basic radiation, alpha, beta, gamma. Uranium is primarily an alpha and a gamma emitter, and alpha rays can be absorbed by tissue paper. Therefore, what's the problem? Well, there's a problem here. Precisely because alpha rays can be absorbed by tissue paper, most of the energy is then lost in that tissue paper, causing an enormous amount of damage per centimeter, much more than you get with beta radiation. Think of a crowd, and you have a speeding car plowing into the crowd. The car, of course, does not go very far into that crowd of people, but think of the damage. Think of the damage caused by the car plowing into a crowd of people. That's alpha radiation. So precisely because alpha radiation is not very penetrating, all of its energy is deposited in the nearby area of the areas that are affected. And the Pentagon itself now mentions the fact that there's a possible kidney, lung, and liver damage. The Pentagon's own documents reveal the fact that, yes, there is a distinct health hazard. In fact, the military personnel are warned to stay about 75 feet away from this material precisely because it is radioactive. Gamma rays will go right through lead. You can encase DU in solid lead, and you'll have some gamma rays coming out. Now, this is without people's permission, not to mention the fact that even if you are in a tank sitting next to the depleted uranium shells in their shell casing, you're also being exposed to large quantities of gamma radiation because you are in close proximity to these shells.
Okay. So that was a great video. Dr. Michio Kaku, pretty intelligent man. He puts it out there pretty clearly. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say other than if we want to live in a world that our great grandchildren can live in, that we can live in for thousands of years to come, we're going to have to change our ways. This type of weaponry, this type of lifestyle, it's not sustainable. So if it's not sustainable, that means the people who depend upon that technology and that lifestyle won't survive. So if we want to survive as a species, We're going to have to gain some wisdom, or nature is going to cull us right out of the big experiment. It's like, well, failure going on here. You guys aren't sustaining. You're not sustainable. See you later. Because there's plenty of other new life forms that want to push their way into the picture and will, if we don't figure it out. So depleted uranium is a big issue. It's one of the big arms of the big centipede or spider that is the nuclear industry. And I really believe that we have to activate as a country, as a society. Every single one of us has to demand from our government that we stop doing this to other people and to our own people. The soldiers who use these depleted uranium weapons, not only are they poisoning the people in the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever else we may choose to fight, but they're getting contaminated themselves, and they're coming home sick. So it's sort of a weird suicide pact with your enemy and your own soldiers. You're willing to sacrifice your own soldiers in exchange for killing the other ones, and that's pretty sick. And not only are you damaging your own soldiers, you're damaging future generations of people who are fighting for you. That is incredibly sick. So the war never ends. It just keeps on giving. So we really need to put a stop to this madness if we want to survive as a species, and I really think it's that clear. Some people may think I'm being an alarmist. I don't know. I've looked into it pretty deeply, and I just don't see any way that we can continue to spread this stuff around the planet and survive. It's just not going to work. So anyway, I really invite you to come to our meetings and get involved. I'm also involved with a group named Fukushima Response, and we are focused particularly on the situation of Fukushima and trying to get that situation as neutralized as humanly possible. And so if you want to get in touch with that group, or if you want to get involved with Occupy Ukiah, come to our meeting, our General Assembly, Alex Thomas Plaza, 10 o'clock on Saturday, and our direct action meeting, 11 o'clock on Sunday at the MEC here in Ukiah. And stay tuned. Tune into the radio show, tune into the TV show. We'll be bringing more stuff. We're just trying to educate ourselves so that we can speak halfway intelligently. All right, well, it's been great being on here, and we've got our Howard Zinn quote to close out the show. And I'm really pleased, one more touch in about the election. I'm really pleased that Barack Obama did win. I voted for him. I voted for him the first time. I was not happy with the last 4 years. No, I was not happy. Although I wouldn't have had anybody else in there. If you were going to have McCain or one of those other buffoons that we saw on the screen, I think that Obama was the better choice in that respect. But we can't sit back and say, okay, I think probably a lot of you out there are fairly happy that he's in office. It doesn't matter. Whether you voted for him or not, you've got to put, whoever's in office, you've got to put their feet to the fire and make them do, make your view known and make them do what we want, because they are public servants. They are no more than public servants. And we have to remind them of that every day. So our Howard Zinn quote of the day, you've heard it before, and I always like it. Can we go to the blue screen here, Alex? The quote is, I think people are dazzled by Obama's rhetoric, and that people ought to begin to understand that Obama is going to be a mediocre president, which means, in our time, a dangerous president, unless there is some national movement to push him in a better direction. And I think that's really important for us to remember, that none of these guys are going to just get up in the morning and say, I want to do wonderful things for the people. They have to be pushed by groups like us, like all the other good activist groups in the country. Whether you agree with them politically or not, they're putting their view out there and they're letting people know where they stand. and then we can all talk together and see what we can figure out as a society. All right then, enough from me. It's been great being back. Thank you, Alex Bergdahl. Great engineering. He does a great job. And we'll be coming back probably in a couple weeks. So this is Charlie Vaughn from Occupy Ukiah TV signing off. We'll see you around town.